Welcome everybody to the Northern Nuclear Alliance meeting. Glad everybody's joining us. We've got a packed programme today. We've got an update from Steve Dixon to tell us about the Sellafield PPP, and then an introduction to social values. I know a lot of our company, and Steve Topping's joining as well, so that's great. But I know a lot of you are working with their businesses, looking at social value and supporting our communities. And Cath, Howard and Claire Louise Chapman today are going to tell us a little bit more about it. From a commercial standpoint as well now, all public tenders, 10% of the tenders that we're providing to the UK government, it's going to be quantified on the value we provide. So without much more ado, I'd like to hand over to Steve Dixon to tell us a little more about the PPP. Thank you.
Okay, Steve, you're going to put the presentation up?
Yeah, just waiting. They need to stop sharing. There we go. I can share my screen now. So there you go. Okay.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Dixon. I'm the Senior Supply Chain Manager for Morgan Sindall Nuclear Sector, and also the Lead Supply Chain Manager for the multi-project procurements, which we're going to talk to you about this morning. I've been told never to start a presentation with an apology. Well, I'm going to start with two, actually. The first one is I'm sat in a car park in Preston, pulling on every piece of bandwidth I've got, hence not putting my cam on. So hopefully that'll hold up. But if it doesn't, Mr. Topping and Mr. Rossiter know more than enough about this subject to be able to step in and save me. And the second will be, some of you might have known, might be familiar with some of the slides or some of the content. We're aware that some of the people on the call will already know some of this information, and but we're not assuming. So we're going to start from the beginning, really. Next slide, please, Steve. Okay, so the PPP journey started probably 4 or 5 years ago when PPP decided, when Sellafield decided that it wanted to change its philosophy of major project build. So up until then, it was using an EPC type model, but recognised that it wasn't getting the lessons learned and continuous improvement through its project build philosophy. So they came up with this new Project 13. The government came up with a Project 13 initiative, which Sellafield grabbed onto, and decided that once they recognised that they needed circa 20 new project builds over the next 20 years, the philosophy changed and decided to run the procurement, which became PPP. So PPP is 4 lot partners plus Sellafield themselves as the 5th partner. KBR are the integration partner. Jacobs were Wood at the time, but Jacobs the design partner. Morgan Sindall the construction partner, and Dixon Babcock the process partner. So that's PPP. The philosophy is that it will be integrated through KBR. Jacobs will take on the design to a certain maturity level, and then pass that maturity over to the supply chain to deliver. So this is a management type contract. So actually Morgan Sindall and Dixon won't be having any blue collar work on the site in terms of the PPP teams. It'll all be delivered through the supply chain. Next slide, please, Steve. So this slide sort of shows how it cascades from Sellafield's corporate strategy, the drivers, the sort of 5 partners and 1 PPP, and the critical success factors. So obviously outcome, cost management, output, workforce skills and employment. those are the five main tenets that will make PPP a success. If we deliver well against those 5 critical success factors, PPP will be, you know, a positively looked at program of works over the 20 years. Next slide, please, Steve. So these are the actual projects and the makeup of the projects over the 20-year period. As you can see, there's 19 listed, and things fluctuate on a monthly basis in terms of projects. You know, as you know, at Sellafield, things change, and sometimes that project list might increase or it might decrease. At the moment, we've got 19. We've got 5 which we call in flight at the moment. So we've got SRP, which is a plutonium repackaging facility. We've got SCP, which is an effluent treatment facility. We've got RAP, which is an analytical type project. We've got BEPS, which is a store. And then we've got a lowly shielded store, which is LSS. So those 5 are known as the in-flight projects, and the rest are in the pipeline. So if you look at SRP and SCP, SRP is being run by Morgan Sindall, SCP is being run by Dixon, and they're fairly well through design and even into construction. So we're starting to put the superstructures up for those 2 buildings. RAP is probably a couple of years behind that, and BEPS and LSS are in study phase. The rest are just in the pipeline at the moment. Okay, next slide, please, Steve. Yeah, so I'd like to now hand over to John, who's going to take you through some aspects of collaborative procurement.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. So yeah, just to echo Steve's initial apologies, really, in that some of you may well have heard some of this content. Partly don't apologise for repeating some of it, as it's sort of really important stuff that's going to shape the PPP model. But the intent is in this forum really to just give you a bit of an overview of what PPP commercial model is, but how that applies to the supply chain, and if you're interested in opportunities with PPP, how that might fit in effectively. So next slide, please, Steve. So the PPP model itself, Steve mentioned Project 13, which is an IC-led initiative, which brought together members of industry in terms of looking at how to rectify failing infrastructure delivery models. And the key sort of point about Project 13 is that you're aiming to create an enterprise. So rather than have a very vertical traditional supply chain where you have a sort of employer subby, which is about how much risk can we pass down the supply chain, you kind of turning the supply chain on its side. So risk might flow sort of sideways, but it's about that whole enterprise all delivering to outcomes effectively. So rather than each party being about its own margin and how it can perform and how it can manage its own risk, it's about the whole enterprise performing to a set of outcomes and success factors. So in PPP, that the outcomes are defined against the 5 critical success factors that Steve mentioned. So again, it's a lot more than just project delivery. Of course, cost management is a big pillar of project delivery, but it's about employment and looking to reduce agency supplied workers in the supply chain. It's about increasing outcomes. So again, parties here to make a profit, and the CSFs recognise that. And it's about generating better output and long-term workforce skills, which is all comes into why PPP is such a long-term programme to give every chance of hitting those critical success factors. So it does come off the back of 3 different procurement models recommended in the 2016-2020 government construction strategy. PPP is a form of 2-stage open book. So effectively, you procure the partner and you build up the costs of the project on an open book collaborative basis. So next slide, please, Steve. So what we've done with that in PPP, Steve Dixon mentioned about level of partners and management contracting where Morgans or Dixon don't do any work. We've formed a model whereby we bring in the next layer of partners. So if you imagine that sort of slide Steve presented, sets out the top level partners, we're looking to bring in another level of partners to deliver works and services on behalf of PPP. So that ethos about creating an enterprise flows right down through the strategies that we are putting in place, so that we end up with an approach where we have one team who are looking to optimize value and create a high performing enterprise. So that will mean that if the enterprise performs, then all the entities in our enterprise make profits as one integrated team. And it is a shift in behaviour and culture. I'm focused on enterprise and not individual parties' performance. A lot of you, if you're familiar with the nuclear sector, will know a lot about collaboration and might have worked on things like NEC contracts. But that's all still traditionally very much in the space of your individual project's performance and your individual contract. What does that mean for your contract? This is about bringing it away from contract level, but even away from project level, and looking at succeeding against an enterprise success factors. And we've structured our multi-project procurement model to align with our lot partners' contracts. So again, we're not looking at we're up here and we've got huge 18-year contracts, which we're then looking to flow risk through the supply chain or create any divisive contracts. We're looking about absolute back-to-back alignment with our partners. Next slide, Steve, please. So what our multi-project procurement model is then is looking at common items of goods that will be procured across all projects. So across the circa 25 projects that PPP will tackle over the next 18 years, there was a number of key and significant packages of work that'll feature on every project. So if you're familiar with the nuclear sector, you can probably guess a lot of those packages. It's your main items of work, such as your civil, your HVAC, your electrical, and then various works and service agreements. So what we've done is we've developed a model that focuses on the critical success factors, and that's broadly brought us to two categories of commercial model. So the key delivery partner model is the most significant. So that's the 12 main construction trades, some of which I mentioned then, and they are very much on an absolute back-to-back basis. So that would be our HVAC partners will deliver all of the HVAC on behalf of PPP over the next 18 years, ditto our civils. And we believe our key delivery partners can help us hit all of our 5 critical success factors in that. Yes, on a project delivery basis, they can work with us to build the right targets and then go and outperform those targets in terms of time, cost and quality on projects. But also they have that same reciprocal opportunity as PPP does in terms of long-term investments in the region, creation of skills and eradication of agency supply work throughout the supply chain and things like that. We've then also got a number of goods works or service agreements. These are your more traditional frameworks where PPP might require some ad hoc goods such as fabricated items or site accommodation. So there'll be a mini competition type framework, or there may well be a requirement for works or services that come up throughout the duration of PPP, but they're not something we can track with on an 18-year open book basis because it's not suitable for either our demand or for what the market offering is. Next slide, please, Steve. So some of the key principles of the key delivery partner model is that we flow down the PPP ethos and profit performance. So again, it's fair and equitable contracts. So there's no delay damages. We're not looking to flow down high risk agreements. We're looking at long-term relationships on the maximum available term where performance is defined by outcomes. So in very simple terms, if the project achieves its outcomes and those outcomes are flowed down and the enterprise achieves its outcomes, then the entities in the supply chain will be rewarded by way of profit for that. So what we're looking for key delivery partners to be are either partnerships or defined supply chains that deliver all works in that category. The real sort of unique bit that we're trying to focus on the model is that we want our key delivery partners to deliver and encapsulate the whole supply chain, which will include SME delivery partners. So again, so I'll touch on some of the things we're doing in that space shortly, but we recognise that these are large hundreds of million packages of work over 18 years. But we want that to be the opposite of exclusive to SMEs and entire supply chain. We want them to be positive. We want to see that our key delivery partners, and just as we did PPP, are looking at how does this play out right through the model, who will the supply chain be, how will they be engaged, and how can we engage them to make sure that we hit those critical success factors. So again, probably on traditional contracts, I'm sure you all experienced how you get a three-year contract, and that's quite restrictive in terms of what you can do in terms of recruitment, developing apprenticeships, the local area. But often that's all you get. If you're a subcontractor or you're working down the chain, you can't get that long-term commitment. So that's absolutely what we're trying to do with the key delivery partner model. We're trying to create long-term invested supply chain throughout. And early involvement, GCI, the acronym there, is achieved by effectively embellishing the project aligned delivery teams at the right time with the right people. So when I mentioned earlier one team delivering a project, that's the aligned delivery team in PPP, org chart effectively. ECI for us just means bringing the right person in at the right time. So that might be bringing in the guy who's going to do the block work at the very start of the design and construction planning stage, so that they can either contribute in terms of constructability or design, or even logistics, even contributing to the planning of the project, so that when that person comes to deliver the works, they're well aware of what their package is and it's delivered efficiently. So that's a big aim of PPP, that we bring the right people in early, so that we have a chance of achieving success from before we even started the project. The next slide, please, Steve. So the final bit I just wanted to touch on in terms of the commercial model and what we're looking to do to roll it out through the supply chain is something called the matchmaking service that we've launched in PPP. Now, this is in conjunction with the Swimming with the Big Fish Forum that's been established in West Cumbria to look at taking on some learnings from Hinkley Point C and looking at how the SMEs, that the little fish effectively, can achieve long-term frameworks and opportunities with larger companies. So working with Swimming with the Big Fish, we developed the matchmaking service. Now, that aims to effectively look for SMEs in each category of work aligned to what we've got to procure. So the matchmaking service is live at the moment, looking at some of our tranche 1 procurements that Steve will talk about. And it's about looking where we've got similar businesses that complement each other, but where we can bring in SMEs on a long-term basis with a clear commitment to our success factors. So we've had quite a few questions on the matchmaking service in the past, and we've had quite a few people saying, is it just for SMEs? Do you have to be based in Cumbria? What we're looking to achieve with our matchmaking service is exactly that. We're looking to match companies that will align to our success factors, which include localization. So that doesn't mean you've got to be based in Cumbria, but we'd be looking for a commitment to Cumbria, tie into Sellafield success factors and their own social impact aims, but also maybe just go a bit further and encouraging these relationships. So there's lots of work going on behind the scenes from the team in terms of physical human relationships, sitting and understanding with SMEs, what do you need, what commitments are you looking for, what can you give in return for that. I'm really looking to go a step further than probably we've done in the past, to make sure that when our key delivery partners are awarded, they do encapsulate SMEs, and that they're the right SMEs that will help us achieve our critical success factors in PPP. There is an email address there, so if you want to register any interest in matchmaking, please do. As you can imagine, there's a lot of interest in it, and we are focusing on, at the moment, the packages that we've currently got in front of us that are out in the market for tranche 1. But as I say, keen to engage with everybody in the supply chain. So if there's any queries, just drop an email to that email address there, FAO Dawn Keane, and we will pick it up and register your interest. I think that effectively concludes my segment. Sorry, it doesn't. Rewind. So the model summary then, we're looking for key delivery partners that will deliver works. We're not looking to add layers of management contracting. We're looking for a strategic vehicle to support PPP and the critical success factors. We are excited about the model. We do think it's game changing for the local supply chain and SMEs in the area. And I think we're a really key point in delivering Sellafield transformation agenda and social impact in West Cumbria. It would be really clear that what we're not looking for is large contractors that come in and that are here today, gone in 5 years. We want PPP and our key delivery partner model to be a part of empowering and growing a capable nuclear supply chain in Cumbria and Warrington. I think, as I've said, we don't want bids from large companies that just promise self-delivery or siphon off work, which is typically the way on nuclear mega projects. We want to see that we've got truly invested and integrated supply chain. I think that effectively concludes my section.
It does it, thanks for that. Hi. So just a quick introduction from myself. So Steve Toppin, currently Dixon Babcock, so a lot for operations manager, although for the past 7 or 8 months now I've been working with John and Steve on helping to implement the MPP approach, and of course I'm here today just to give you a bit of an update on that. So just a few slides from me which will cover current progress, bit of LFE, and what's coming next. And we said before, we've shared these slides previously at various forums, so apologies if you're seeing this for the 2nd, 3rd or even 4th or 5th time. So just going back on just a touch of detail that just builds on what the guys have already said. I mean, across the patch, when you look at all of the different aspects of everything that could be common across the project, then you come up with quite a long list of things, and I think 30 plus. I think the exact number was 38. was the original list of everything and anything that you could come up with. But clearly, there are already some existing arrangements in place and some things that don't warrant themselves to be included in a multi-procurement sort of, or multi-project procurement sort of way. So we are focused on the initial 12 key delivery partners. And again, John's outlined some of the detail of the commercial arrangements that support that, and some of the good supply agreements as well, the 4 in particular that are currently on the list. So about half of that total, you might say, is our current focus. And again, what we've said previously, we can't just flick a magic switch and turn all of these things on instantaneously, as you can imagine, because there is a procurement process to go through to select the various partners. And so therefore, instead of trying to do everything at once, we have phased things or put things into different tranches, as we called it originally. And those different tranches will run through 2021 into 2022. But the overarching challenge for us all is to get all of those arrangements in place by the end of next year. So clearly we've got projects in flight at the moment, and I say if we had the magic wand, we'd wave that and everything would be in place now, and all of the current projects will be calling off against those MPPs and everyone would be happy. But we're trying to do things in parallel. And the analogy was made, we're trying to change the aeroplane wings in flight, which is a tricky thing to do, as you can imagine. And therefore, there's all sorts of different competing challenges and needs as we try to implement the MPPs, as well as deliver the current projects that are in flight. So in those tranches, we said typically 4 to 6 packages, as you'll see on one of the following slides. The next phase, the next number of packages that will instigate or initiate will probably be less than that, maybe 3 or 4 packages. That's all part of trying to balance everything out against the requirements that we've got in front of us. And so what makes up the packages? What makes up the which packages go into those? And therefore, as I say, we've got these 5 current projects. Steve ran through them before, different phases. So they all have different needs. Some of them at the back end, as you say, very much through the design, so really into the nitty-gritty of fabricating and of constructing, whereas BEPS and LSS are on the beginning of the journey. But the important point there with BEPS and LSS, as again John Rossiter mentioned, is about enabling the early contractor involvement. So during the design phase, we actually do want to bring on board the constructors and the guys who are going to deliver things down the line. So even though they might be at the early stages of the design phase, it is important that we get the MPPs in place that allow them to bring in the partners at the earliest stage possible and to influence and have an impact on that design. So we're looking at that project pipeline in the next 1 to 3 years. So as well as the 5 current projects, there are a couple more now coming towards the end of their study phase. And once sanctioned into project space, then PPP will pick those up, and that against the current portfolio again would be a mix of maybe some more process buildings and maybe 1 or 2 additional stores that need to come through and get delivered through the model. But that's very much work in progress, and continues, that understanding continues to develop with Sellafield, who obviously are ultimately the client and therefore need to make sure that all the relevant arrangements are in place to support the investment that's required going forward. We've mentioned also, we look at it from the point of view of, well, what's really important to PPP's long-term success? So where can we get get early access to and quick wins when we're looking at the CSFs, and in particular around the collaboration and also the social value agenda that we're all trying to deliver against. So that's sort of setting the scene, or a little bit of a reminder of how we've got to where we've got to, really. If I move on then to where we're actually at the moment, and just share with you some of the detail, which hopefully, well, we'll underline 1 or 2 messages, I think, as we go through that. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side, the little table there, are all of the current packages that are in flight: HVAC, electrical, building fit out, fabrication, accommodation, and mechanical pipework. And from those, you'll see the planned dates, those in black, and you'll see the actuals and the forecast dates. So this is taken from the weekly report that I produce, part of the team. So you're seeing actual data. But I think the point there, when you look at those dates, I mean, some of them there's a little bit of variance around the dates, as you would expect. But actually, we are just about on track delivering what we said we would deliver, which I think from a supply chain point of view is really important, that we put those things out there roughly around the time when we said we would. And that's what we were doing. There is one, as ever, there's one outstanding from that, and that's the fabrication package. Those of you who's already zoomed in, honed in on those dates, you'll see that that is taking us a little bit longer than we anticipated to get out to ITT. And there's good reason for that, and that's really making sure that we understand exactly what we need and how we want that to be delivered going forward. So there's been some challenges to the scope of that particular package. Some of you on the call may have been involved in responding to the PQQ and you're waiting for the ITT, so I can only apologise for that. But we do really need to get it right before we launch into that. And so we're just going through another review, you might say, of the scope associated with that. But I'm hoping that the clouds will part very soon on that one, and we'll be out to market with the ITT. So so I think, say, the key message there is that generally we are managing to maintain our program, and we're still very much on track for getting all of these KVPs and the GSAs in place by the end of next year. As well as that, we're also claiming the first MPP has been put in place. So that was the accommodation package. We've utilised a Morgan Sindall arrangement for that. So that is available now. And I think RAP is going to be the first project that actually goes through that and utilises that. So that's the first multi-project procurement in place, as you might say. And what have we seen when we started to implement these packages? And of course, the engagement with the supply chain is really, really important. So each package has had a market engagement session or period of time, and also the matchmaking John's mentioned. And we've seen some very positive engagement with the supply chain and some good feedback in terms of the details, but also I think more importantly that the principles and the model look like they are going to deliver what they're hoping they will do. But also, as well as not just believing our own sort of our own views, is we have taken some external independent viewpoints, had some external independent assurance of the overall strategy, and that's really important to ensure that we're still very much on track against the Project 13, the PPP ethos, etc., etc. We've had some positive feedback from that says, yeah, guys, it is shaping up. You are starting to bring to life the model in the way that you would envisage. Clearly, there's still a lot to do as we go forward, but that's been very positive so far. And we've also had the positive support of Sellafield as the customer, ultimately supporting and challenging at times, we might say, as we go through this. That progressive assurance approach is working as we stand today. A couple of things towards the back end of the process, or really to manage some of the risk, and what we've incorporated into the procurement process is a contract deviations process. So the idea being is that we get the discussion around the T's and C's early doors, so we don't get to the end of the procurement and then we start to get down to the nitty gritty of the T's and C's. We're trying to do that early. We're trying to do that up front. And so we can then move into contract award pretty swiftly at the back end. The other feature of some of these procurements is we are trying to integrate, where possible, specific project requirements in the form of ITNs. Now that sometimes creates some difficulty because, as I say, we're trying to do two things in parallel, but we're trying to do that to, as I say, service the short-term needs of the projects, but also put in place the long-term relationships. And I say, in some instances, it's proven a little bit tricky to do that, and hopefully not causing too much confusion within the supply chain, but we'll explain ourselves as we go along. And then the final point on here, again, already mentioned, we're really looking for that early contractor involvement to be enabled, and we'll do that through a PSC arrangement within the frameworks that we'll put in place. So that's a little bit on where we've got to in terms of implementation. So what have we seen so far in terms of you know, the learning, a bit of lessons learned as we go along. So I've seen a lot of interest in the model, responses during market engagement, questionnaires, etc. But more importantly, I think some of the feedback, you know, the way we're approaching this and the way we set this up doesn't necessarily match everybody's business, you might say. And so, you know, having that open and honest conversation about how it will work and does it actually work for me in terms of the supply chain organizations, I think is quite refreshing, and it's exactly what we need, because none of us want to get into a situation where we select certain partners and then we start to wonder whether it'll work or not. We need people committed to this from the very outset. So the level of engagement has been really useful. It has helped to identify lead organizations or lead suppliers where potential partners may fit in to those, and or tiered supply chain arrangements and matchmaking, etc. is helping to do a lot of that. So it's really important that we get that say understanding up front. The thing with matchmaking and the likes, though, is that it's not really for us to define the final answer there. We can do the introductions and we can help facilitate, but the supply chain needs, and supply chain organizations are the ones who need to make their own decisions based on their interest and their business offering. So we won't come up with a solution to that, but we'll encourage and positively encourage that and enable that in any way we can. We've also seen a lot of support from supply chain organizations who've provided responses, timely responses to the questionnaires, etc., that we've put out there. We've had one or two requests for extensions of time, and we will deal with those as best we can, even within our tight schedule, but we are moving forward, and so we've had a lot of good engagement. So therefore, a significant amount of effort being made by supply chain companies. Final couple of bullets, really, not always easy to say exactly what's needed and when, and that's where a little bit of trust needs to come into this. We know certain aspects of current projects, but exactly what do we need 5 years from now, 10 years from now, your guess is as good as mine. We understand the types of projects that are in the portfolio, but do we know exactly how it's all going to work in the future? No, well, no, we don't, and therefore that's why we need to work flexibly and together to ensure that you know, we achieve whatever the challenges are ahead of us going forward. And certainly the last bullet's a really important bullet point from ourselves. You know, we've learned a lot on this journey as we've gone along. Lots of areas where we would make changes, improvements, etc., etc. It is a long list, and we're working on that in the background. But the important thing for me, and the message that I've sort of reiterated internally, is this isn't about contract award. You know, getting to that point where we select partners is only the first step on the journey. The real work starts post-contract award, when we start to onboard and transition and start to go after those CSFs, working with our partners. And that's where we have to invest even more time and effort to make it actually work for us all. So as I say, that's a message I keep repeating myself to any stakeholders who care to listen. So just to finish off then, what's coming next? We've talked a little bit about what's in flight, and as it stands today, this is what the future looks like. Although I must say, just in some of the discussions last week, that there are some challenges to the running order, just from the point of view, as I mentioned, you know, BEPS and LSS, the first projects that will commence under the PPP banner, they want some ECI, so things like concrete structures. Are we really going to look for those down the line? They need it sooner rather than later. So the plan will continue to develop as we go along. And as will the model continually be challenged as our understanding increases. We do hope to get the next couple of packages out in the next few weeks, in July and August time, and then we'll probably about, well, maybe up to 2 months it'll take us to get the strategies aligned before we get out to market engagement. So all I can do is continue to stress, keep your eye on what's happening at the moment. We're still advertising packages through CTM, so keep your eye on that. And by all means, drop us a line and we'll try and update you with the latest information we've got. There's no reason why we should hide any of this. It's in our best interest that you guys have got the best information available. And as we say, the bottom line is get everything in place by the end of 22 and then build on there going forward. So that's all I wanted to cover in terms of current plans and implementation. And what we did say, though, we'd offer up to take any questions really at this point. And what I probably will do is stop sharing my screen for a moment or two so I can actually see the chat and see if there's any questions coming up.
We have had a question from Roy Allen, and it's partially been answered by Dominic, but I'll vocalize it anyway for those who just logging in. Prior to this meeting, I was in the process of completing a questionnaire for the matchmaking service and came up against several score-loaded questions relating to Cumbrian local SMEs. My question, therefore, which I've asked before, are SMEs outside of Cumbria wasting their time and effort in applying for this? And Dominic Doig has put a detailed answer in, so if anyone wants to read it, but whether, Dominic, you want to vocalize that at all?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to say there, yeah, I put the answer in quite clearly, I think, but yeah, you're quite right. As the team just mentioned there, everybody's working towards the critical success factors, aren't they? Which is about localization. There's no getting around that. So what I'm basically saying is, for Matchmaker, if you score in our questionnaire matrices above 50%, then you'll get gold or silver, depending on the quality of the responses, and therefore would go forward for matching. So in terms of organisations that are not based in West Cumbria, there are certain questions that do prompt or push you down that route. So I think the answer to Roy is you could still easily get above the 50% if you are showing that you have social impact in your own region, that you employ apprentices, and that you have the ability to deliver against critical success factors. However, you probably would, in all honesty, score about 15% less than an organisation that was committed to investment in the region. So yeah, you could still score up to 85% or thereabouts. That's not an exact number, so don't quote me to that. But certainly everything to play for in terms of Matchmaker, even if you're not an organisation that's willing to, to support West Cumbria or Warrington. So hopefully that answers that one.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? That's a very good answer, and it's worth looking at the chat, as I mentioned. Does anybody else have any other questions, or do we want to? I know Steve Dixon was going to present a little more. We'll save it to the end.
Hi, James. Sorry, I was just saying that if there's questions after the fact, after today, please submit them by the email address, because we can easily pick them up there.
No problem.
So I guess it's one of two things, James. Either everything we've said everybody understands fully, which is great, or they're sick of hearing it, or maybe there's another option. But yeah, if there are any questions, please just drop us a line after the presentation.
Just a quick one, Steve, if I can ask. It's Andrew Bradley from Def UK. We're fire protection and detection systems. I noticed that you've got the MPP package at a later date for that category. But I also noticed that Sellafield have a categorized product coming out shortly. Are they one of the same thing, or I got the impression that the categorized products were looking to, go right across all the major projects?
Yeah, so no, they're not one and the same, and this is part of the challenge. I mean, when you look at MPPs won't be 100%, one-stop shop. When projects pull together their acquisition strategies, they'll look at existing Sellafield arrangements, category management arrangements that are already in there. What may be applicable from an MPP point of view, and also if there are any specific areas, specialisms or whatever, where projects will still run their own standalone procurements. And it's definitely one of the things we have to take into consideration when we're putting the package together. So we started off with that original list, and yes, we've got a fire detection and protection package on there, but when we pull the strategy together, which is the first stage for that package, we'll have to look at all the existing Sellafield arrangements or planned Sellafield arrangements and make sure what we're not doing is creating any duplication of effort or undermining any particular framework that's planned or in existence. So that's why it's still, as I mentioned, the situation develops all the time. And therefore, we'd have to work through that particular challenge, Alan, as we look at that package.
Thanks for that, Steve.
Does anybody else have anything else? Matt Calverley. If our services span multiple packages, will the PPP matchmaking team guide us where our services best fit? Could you please provide further information on this process, introduction, etc.? Thank you.
Who wants to pick that one up? Dominic, do you want to come back in on that, or maybe John?
I don't mind touching on that one. Yeah, I mean, obviously on generally the way matchmaking's working is aligned to our tranches of our tranches and our packages, which when we draft each strategy, we say what's sort of generally included in that and what's generally excluded. So the matchmaking team work to those same boundaries. So when they're engaging, if you say, well, we do this type of work, the matchmaking team have got visibility of where that might fit in terms of packages. So yeah, I think unless Dominic's got anything to say to the contrary, I think engage with matchmaking, and if it's that you might be able to support multiple packages, then that'll be picked up by virtue of that scope split.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, it's not an exact science. We recognise that certain SMEs can provide services across various packages. Once we've spoken to SMEs, we've got the information from them in terms of responses in questionnaires. We're then looking at them, aren't we? We understand the business, and if we think, well, actually, we've got something to offer for electrical or mechanical or whatever it might be, we're going to come forward and say, have you thought about this? Would you like to register for that package? So we're trying to be proactive and support. So we'll obviously do that.
Thank you, Dominic. Monica's just posted. You've obviously answered Matt's question. Monica's just asked about posting your email addresses. If you could just post your email addresses, if you're happy to share, people can copy it. Obviously, we record the chat as well when we post it out live to our members. So that would be helpful if you could do.
Okay.
Thank you. Because I was having IT problems earlier, we normally do a bit of a safety share, really. This is about house fires in the home, really. I was my son plays hockey, and I was away at a hockey festival. He was representing in a national tournament, but I was staying in a hotel, and plugged my USB phone charger into the wall, and it managed to trip out the electricity. And so I was in a room that had a sump pump, which actually started to fill the bath up with water because all the drains didn't work. So it's a bit of a disaster, really. But essentially it reminded me about fire safety and all your electrical hazards that you have in your home. Annually, about 200 fire-related deaths every year. And these normally occur at night. Obviously, with our USB phone charger, we chucked it straight in the bin. It was obviously faulty. It seemed to work in our house, but it seemed to knock out the systems in this hotel. But it's important. After that, we checked that we had an escape route and we could go out the back door, so everything was fine there. you also only have minutes to escape from a fire, so every second counts. At home, I actually sleep on the 3rd floor, and we've bought an escape ladder to help us get it down the first 2 floors. But these are just areas to consider, really, that you can get out your building. There are about 37,000 house fires every year in the UK, and the majority, obviously, from electrical equipment, mainly cooking appliances that use a lot of power. But again, these USB charger things, if they're not generic ones, they have been known to cause problems. So yeah, check your smoke alarm works, check you've got somewhere to get out of the building, and with the smoke alarm, you're far more times likely to escape with your life. So just a little prompt, next time you're away, check you've got an escape route, and have a look at all your USB equipment and chargers. Just a little prompt there. So hopefully that covers that little safety share. We're just a little early for our social values presentation. Cath, Claire, are you okay to jump in now and present? Does that all work for you?
Yeah, that's fine for me.
That's fine by me.
Fantastic. Okay. Tell us about social value. It's an area that I've been looking at a lot recently, and we do a lot for the community, my companies, as others do, but how it fits into what's considered social value, I'd be really interested to understand. So, Cath, if you'd like to lead out.
Do you want me to start, or you go, Cath? We were just going to introduce ourselves to start with, weren't we? Shall I start?
We were, and then Claire will take over. So first of all, my name's Cath Howard. I work on the BEP project, the box encapsulation plant, and I'll be talking more detail about some of our tendering to give you live examples. So over to Claire.
Yeah, so I'm Louise Chapman, and I'm a social value consultant. So what that means is I help any business working in any public sector driven supply chain to design social value strategy, and also develop in tender social value action plans. So I'm going to do a whistle stop overview really of what social value is. So mine is not, I work with clients in the nuclear sector, and I work with clients outside the nuclear sector. So I'm going to talk about social value as a principle. I'm going to talk about legislation and procurement policy notes. So that's going to be particularly exciting. And then I'm going to just run through how Sellafield talks about social value. So next slide, please. So social value is a principle. So as a principle, social value is the principle of kind of doing good. It's about businesses integrating behaviours that benefit society. It's quite different from corporate responsibility, which most people will have heard of. There's a couple of main differences. So CSR tends to be a bit of an add-on. You run your business. If your business does well, you choose to do something good with that money, but it's not necessarily integrated into your business behaviours. Social value is about integrating behaviours in the way that you do business. The other side of it is that because of its responsive nature, corporate responsibility tends to be, it doesn't tend to address the causality of social issues. So the example I use is food banks. So most business, or many businesses, donate to food banks, and that's absolutely vital because we have families and a lot of children that are going hungry at the moment. But giving to a food bank doesn't actually do anything to address the fundamental causes of food poverty. Food poverty is caused by people not working enough hours and earning enough in the hours that they work. And there's stuff around the benefit system as well. But we can see that a social value response would start to say, let's look at the way that we contract with our employees. Do we use 0 hours contracts? Are we a living wage employer? It's those kind of commitments. So you can see that a really good business response to address social issues will combine thinking about social value aspects of the way that you work and you treat people, you employ people, and it'll also give to things like food banks because that need is immediate and it's there. So next slide, please. So coming on to the slightly more technical stuff. So back in 2012, the Social Value Act was passed, and it basically said that government should use its spend to try and cause social good. So the way that the government does business should add value socially. So this act was passed at the end of 2012, and to be honest, it was largely ignored by most people. But quite a few local authorities took notice of it and went, that's a really good idea. We're going to start doing something about it. As of last year, a procurement note came through basically telling central government departments, and they reckon there's about best part of £50 billion spend through those departments, that they needed to properly integrate social value, what's being called social value, through their purchasing. So social value should be explicitly evaluated in all central government procurement, and it's related and proportionate to the subject matter of the contract. That's quite important. In fact, it's pretty fundamental, that relation and proportion. So the social value that you're delivering should be related to the contract and proportionate to what's happening within that contract and the value of that contract. So the government is now applying a minimum 10% social value weighting within tender documentation, and local authorities are basically just putting in what they're feeling like at the moment. So it's a minimum 10%. So there was also another procurement came out this month, which then, because the first procurement note was only central government departments, and then this second one is saying that basically all contracting authorities, so that's any public sector buying, is now going to be asking technical questions on social value within any of their procurement activity. And what that procurement note now says is that it should be about focusing on creating new businesses, new jobs, new skills, tackling climate change and reducing waste, and improving supplier diversity, innovation and resilience. So next slide, please. So this I just pulled from, I was at a presentation by Social Value Portal a couple of weeks ago, and they used this slide, which I thought was quite interesting because I know it's quite small, but you can see what weightings local authorities are now using. So you can see that Brighton and Hove is up to 30%, and the Manchester authorities are discussing going up to 30%. So this is becoming pretty critical that you kind of get your head around this, really. Next slide, please. So the social value model. So basically, as of the end of last year, when central government said to all its central departments, you must do this, I think that it would have been quite interesting to be a bit of a fly on the wall, because I think a lot of the procurement teams probably went, how? How on earth do we do this? How do we procure for social value? And so what was created was something called the social value model, which is basically a methodology on how government integrates buying social value from its supply chain. So there are 5 themes within this. So you can see that it's the one of tackling economic inequality. So we've got our jobs and skills priority, fighting climate change, equal opportunity and well-being, which tend to be more internal facing actions. So equal opportunity is about making sure that we offer opportunities for the most disadvantaged in our society, and that everybody is supported to progress within our organisations. And well-being is that mental health side, well-being and mental health, making sure that our employees are well, capable and supported to do their jobs. I'm not going to talk about indicators because this is a whistle-stop tour, but basically, if you come across indicators, social value indicators are just the actions that you can take to embed social value principles. So they're the kind of like just tangible ideas that you could do in order to implement this within your organizations. And some of those indicators have got financial proxies assigned to them. And sometimes you might come across, Sellafield isn't doing this, but you might come across procurers and commissioners that are starting to ask you to actually calculate the amount of social good that you are causing. And that's what those proxies are for. But to be honest, that's a whole other world of pain, which we won't go into. And anybody working with Sellafield doesn't need to worry about anyway. But if you're working in other supply chains, you might start to see that coming through. So next slide, please. Okay, it's worth talking about actually the doing of social value. So there's these themes, these kind of big outcomes or changes that government wants to see everybody working towards, like tackling climate change and creating an equal society. The way that you do this can be split into 3 ways. So we talk about, within social value, we talk about inherent social value. So when you've got a contract, you won't be scored on inherent social value. So an example of this is I was working with a client in the rail industry a month or so ago. Now, I worked with them a year ago, and we decided that supporting all of their team in suicide awareness was a really good social value activity, because lots of people unfortunately choose to take their lives on the railways. So they said, well, we'll train all our staff in suicide awareness so they're comfortable about having those conversations. Really interestingly, a month ago when I was working with them, Network Rail is now asking or requiring all contractors to have training in suicide awareness, because they've recognised that it's a really big issue. Because they are requiring that through the contract, it isn't social value. It's just something that is standard within contract delivery, but it's still obviously really socially impactful. But because it's being asked for within the contract, you don't score it. It wouldn't be within your social value response in that kind of 10% action plan. Embedded is the way that you deliver social value through your business activities. So it's the way that you deliver the contract. So it would be around employing local people, or it could be, depending on what the client's wanting, it could be around employing local people, people experiencing disadvantage. It's around the way that you're embedding skills development in your workforce. It's those kind of actions that you can do during the delivery of your contract. Additional social value is the stuff that's traditionally been seen as corporate responsibility, and it's the stuff that people tend to think about. So it's these additional actions that you might do. So obviously Beck BC has been really involved with the Business Schools Partnership, or the Link as it's now known, and that's kind of additional volunteering that your team could do that supports local young people. So it's those additional activities that sit outside of direct contract delivery. So a good social value response will look at what can we do through our embedded delivery, and then what can we assign resource or a little bit of money to in terms of the additional stuff. But there's a very clear linkage to what is the need. It's not you just coming up with some cool ideas. Cool ideas are very good, but link them back to what is the need within this locality. The other thing about social value, it is usually locality specific. As we've just been talking about in the question that Roy asked earlier, certain commissioners will define a local area, and your activities, your social value activities, must be within and impacting on that local area if that's what's being asked for. It's a case of just knowing what the commissioner, what the procurer is buying. So if we come on to the next slide, we'll talk about Sellafield. Now, Sellafield has been doing socioeconomics since forever, which is absolutely fantastic. The NDA gives Sellafield the biggest social impact budget because West Cumbria is a very isolated, geographically isolated community, and the economic dependence of that community, those communities on Sellafield, is significant. So there is a culture already within West Cumbria and Sellafield of socioeconomics, and the Sellafield social impact multiplied strategy is how Sellafield sets out what is important to them, and outlines how you can do business with them in terms of your social impact, social value responses. So it's got 5 objectives: resilient economies, thriving communities, social value chains, sustainable incomes and collective impact, and then improving performance is enabler, which basically says how Sellafield will enable those 5 priorities to happen. So if we go for the next slide, which is the last slide, I'm just going to run quickly through what that strategy is about, really. Now, you will see these themes coming through the Sellafield framework activities. So for instance, PPP has a mesh strategy, that is their social value strategy, and that mesh strategy takes its principles from these social impact multiplied priorities. Sellafield is a little bit different from the social value model because Sellafield was doing this before the social value model came out because of its history with socioeconomics. But they are very aligned because those big issues that we have within society are around employability and well-being and equality of access. So there's lots of crossover, but anything you see coming out from Sellafield is likely, obviously I have not got a crystal ball, but generally is likely to be reflecting what's within this sixth strategy. Okay, so your resilient economies is really talking about local Cumbrian supply chain. West Cumbrian businesses are included, but bigger businesses use their power to support local businesses. Thriving communities is basically saying whatever we're doing as businesses with our local communities, it's making the most difference. It's really thinking about what I was talking about, that causality of social need, and saying, if we do this, how much long-term change will it make for local communities? Social value chain is about how we use our supply chain and the supply chain of Sellafield. And John was talking about collaboration, and this is a massive, massive theme that's coming out of Sellafield at the moment. How we work together, how we share our knowledge, how we support each other to create really vibrant supply chains that benefit West Cumbria, because Sellafield's interested in West Cumbria. We must not forget that. So sustainable incomes is around your skills stuff. It's your workforce, your skills, employability. What's your pipeline looking for? The other thing is, social value begins at home, really. Look at your pipeline and say, what is beneficial to us and our local communities? It does not have to be truly altruistic. It benefits everybody. And your collective impact, well, I've talked about that, this idea of coming together. So that was my bit, a whistle through really of what social value is, and then Cath's going to talk about how practically that's being applied within the BET project. So over to you, Cath.
Thank you, Claire Louise. I'm going to screen share now, so hopefully this will work. Right, can somebody shout up to say if they can see that fine? Oh, yeah, Claire Louise, we can see it.
Yes, we can.
That's great. Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, when I'm screen sharing, I can't see people so easily. So, okay then. So, my name's Cath Howard. I'm the social impact manager on the box encapsulation plant, and I'm just going to talk, as Claire Louise said, in a little bit of detail about what we've been doing on BEP and what we're looking for. I don't want to go over what beforehand have said, and also Claire Louise, but it was, and interestingly, although we talk about social value as up to 10% on some contracts, in Manchester we're actually looking at up to 20% of the scoring is now on social value. And for me, that's the difference between winning a contract and not winning it. And also, as has also been highlighted by other speakers, it's the right thing to do. And there's so many quotes that you must have heard already about doing good business makes for good business. So here on BEP, what do we do? Well, when we release tender opportunities, we actually have a paragraph in there about social impact, and it says, has the tenderer provided a social impact plan based on evidence community needs, which complements the BEP-DT plan and includes innovative solutions? So I'm going to just look at that in a little bit more detail. But first of all, how do we score that? So we've got a pretty simple scoring system. 1 is totally unsatisfactory. 5 is exceeding expectations. And so if you score 5, you're described as excellent or superior. If you score 1, it's described as unsatisfactory or without merit. So I wanted to start off by saying maybe what not to write, and this has been taken from an actual tender response that I received. So please find attached the UK recruitment policy. As you're aware, the current contract only covers design and supply. We require no additional resource with our core team. And should the opportunity present itself, we can and will advertise on local government websites. So I scored that as a 1 because I wasn't allowed to score it as a 0, which I would have done. Basically, it's just talking about a recruitment policy. It hasn't actually bothered to look at our social impact strategy. They're bringing that to communities. They haven't even said that it's safeguarding possibly 2 jobs within the core team. So really missed opportunities there. Claire Louise has actually outlined about the difference between social value perhaps and corporate social responsibility, which maybe we're a bit all more comfortable with and understand a bit easier. So I did have a tender received that focused on just charitable giving, really. So I scored it 2. There was no reference to supporting any social impact strategy again. And basically it was about saying they were going to support charitable organisations by sponsorship or giving fundraising, but also developing talent. But there wasn't a single thing in the document about how they would do it or through which routes. So it was really difficult for me because I felt that they wanted to do the right thing, but they didn't articulate that. So what you could write instead, and I'm not actually going to tell you exactly what to write, but this is again from a real example. I wanted to use real examples. So somebody sent me saying for over 40 years, XX, a family-run business based in, has had close ties to the area. We understand the impact that we've had on the community and the responsibility to help the community to flourish. Looking at the BEP Social Impact Strategy 2021, I actually noticed that we had revamped our strategy. We would aim to undertake the following work within our local community. And then what they did was they listed all the activities they wanted to do. They didn't separate them out between corporate social responsibility or social impact, but they listed all of those activities that they wanted to try and do over the course of the tender. And it actually gave me real ability to sort of look at what they were trying to achieve and be able to write positively about that. So some of the things that BEP ourselves, so we are actually, I should have said at the beginning, we're a joint venture of Jacobs and Balfour Beatty with Sellafield. So we are actually reporting back to our Sellafield client team about what we're actually delivering on BEP. And some of the measures or indicators that we are looking at is how we support our MSMEs, which is micro as well as small and medium enterprises with contracts. So some of my time is actually giving time to our own supply chain, talking about what social value is, how we might want to measure it. We have a huge range of our own supply chain from big businesses that absolutely understand social value. They've already got other contracts with Sellafield, so they understand social impact. And then I also talk to very small family-run businesses. And interestingly, I had a conversation with a great one, not based locally in West Cumbria, talked to them about what they do, and they did masses of social value and social impact without recognizing it or naming it. So when I said, oh, you do that, that's brilliant, they had no idea. So we started to talk about how they would actually start to collect this data and be able to then tell their story of what they're doing. So another indicator which links into sustainable incomes, and this is seen right through the Sellafield strategy, but also with PPP mesh, is that sustainable incomes of supporting. So on BEP, we support STEM, although that's becoming STEAM now, the art side as well in there. And on local schools, college visits, or actually doing mock interviews, lots of activities with the schools. We listen to presentations and give feedback to young people to help improve their skills on those areas and hopefully help them more employable for the future. We also talk about how we're increasing opportunities for apprentices, trainees and graduates. So we actually measure the number of apprenticeships, say, on BEP and the reaching level 2 or above that's supported by Jacobs and Balfour Beatty. And the number of people local to West Cumbria. So how many people are employed on site who live locally? And that's again looking at us and saying, actors, and at the end of the contract they disappear. It's about that long in our local area. So then I wanted to go on to a few other indicators. Now, some of these indicators I've been sharing with our own supply chain, and so it's a number of our staff have spent supporting adults with work interviews, and particularly from disadvantaged groups, people with disabilities, armed forces, returners to work after a long period of unemployment. We're also looking at supporting sustainability in the third sector. Now, that can be through funding. We're not saying that giving money is bad, but it's also about using our own resources and sharing that expertise. Sometimes that's more valuable to a not-for-profit group than a few. It might be about business planning. It might be about setting up a new accountancy product, which means that it saves the chief exec time, or the finance governor, because trustees are volunteers as well. We also look at match funding and community pots awards, and we have a monthly safety draw, and I'm going to touch on those a bit later. So again, looking at real examples, one of the ways that we engaged locally in West Cumbria was that we took part in the Dream Placement run by Centre for Leadership. And I particularly wanted to take on two young, less confident young people. So Ella and Marley joined us for a week of work experience. This was during lockdown. We did the whole thing virtually, and I programmed in discussions and time from everybody from the project directors right through to our own apprentices. So they really got a whole range of people to talk to. We also gave them a project to look at, which was our robotics program, and we asked them to do a presentation at the end, which they were both extremely nervous about. So after a week, Ella and Marley fed back that they learned a lot about themselves during the presentation, and that they had the confidence to do it, and being nervous was normal because they were nervous. They also gained their Bronze Industrial Cadets Award, so they had something tangible to show future colleges, depending on where they wanted to go next. And this one quote was about the placement helped them improve so many skills: confidence, communicating, questioning, presenting, researching, teamwork, leadership, putting them out of their comfort zone. And the reason why I've looked at this is because I think people say, oh, social value, it has to be either huge and big, but we're just a little company. How do we make a difference? So this was making a difference to just 2 young people in our locality. But that difference meant that at the end of the week, they had a lot more idea about the world of work. They had some ideas about maybe where they wanted to go into work, but more importantly, increase their confidence in themselves. And that has lasting benefit, hopefully, for the whole of their careers. The next slide was really photographs that were sent to me from our own supply chain again, and picture tells 1,000 words. This was about how we collect that information from supply chain. I think there's a danger with social value that you just becomes a numbers game. You know, we supported X students, we delivered X students, or we delivered to so many people. So for me, the big question is, so what? What difference did you make to those people's lives? And if it's you bring on young apprentices, you train them, you get them into their first proper jobs, that has real value. And I'd rather see 5 of those than 150 of, well, we just went out and gave a talk. And it might have been to a whole load of people who weren't interested in STEM or engineering. So again, it's thinking about that value. So another example was that we got involved in a Project X work awareness program. So BEP, we were a small part of a much bigger picture. So this is where you get the social impact multiplied. So we were one partner, and as you can see from the slide, 64 students from 8 secondary schools took part, with 16 businesses supporting them. All of those students at the end of it got certificates that they could then take on to, like I say, employers or colleges. And again, Zach, year 10, he said that having all the companies giving our group feedback was really good. It's a challenge, so it's pushing you out of your comfort zone. You may remember that's one that Ella and Marley pointed out as well. I think young people need to be challenged, particularly during these times of COVID. But they respond well if it's planned and organised supportively. The next slide is about, well, we do monthly site safety draws. Every time we don't have an LTI, a lost time month in our month, then we actually draw money out £500 we give to a charity, and Sellafield matches that. So £1,000 goes to a charity, and those charities are drawn from nominations from our blue collar workforce. So there's a direct link there to our safety culture, our blue collar workforce engagement, and they see the results of that money actually going to help local charities and not-for-profits. We also celebrate staff fundraising, because again, it's not all about the money, it's not all about the numbers, but we want to engage our staff in fundraising and also volunteering. So we celebrate that as much as possible. So I was thinking about this and I thought, right, well, if I'm a SME and I want to do social impact, and I've never, why start? And I would say, think about what but also where the need is. I think Claire Louise has already said we can do brilliant work, but if there was never a need for that work, then we haven't really made that difference in our communities. So think about what you want to achieve, link it to need, and then you have to be honest. Do I have the resources necessary to do it? We're not suggesting that every small company or medium enterprise could start up an enterprise training company like one of our supply chain did, but maybe by taking on young apprentices and helping them with their career start journey, you are making that difference. You also need to think about how you measure it. Claire Louise has already talked about the TOMs. There are a number of tools out there. I think if you just Google social impact measurement, you can come up with quite a large number, and a lot of professional bodies are now developing their own tools as well. So built environments particularly are ahead of this game. And then how do you tell that story? You do need to do some data collection. You need to collect some information, some photos. You actually doing? What's the outcome? What's the real benefit? Frightened to ask for specialist help if needed. My colleague Luke Richardson is head of social impact on the PPP project, but we also have Claire Louise here as well, who so I think that's the end of my whistle stop tour. Oh, I just wanted to mention two other things as well. We also do volunteering. It's been quite an interesting development for us in that we give time off for our staff to volunteer, but we also link that volunteering back to our social impact strategy. So it's not just a case of, oh, you can have any time off to do whatever you want. It's about either linking into that STEM activity, becoming a trustee for a really vital third sector organisation, or a governor for a school that really needs that business head to come in as well. So there are a huge number of opportunities out there for businesses to engage with. There's organisations out there who help deliver some of this, and you can certainly join in with activities that are already going and add value that way. So I think the last slide is just Claire Louise and my contact details. So any questions, I guess, to either myself or Claire Louise?
I'd like to kick it off just to hopefully get started. That was a very interesting presentation, by the way, and I always find it really difficult to understand what information you need to provide. So there's some clarity there and some real world descriptions about how we can all help describe the social value that we're adding. So thank you very much, Cath and Claire. I think that was an excellent presentation. For me, some of the questions are about how do you define community? And I know you're saying it's all about West Cumbria, but if you're actually doing a contract that's for Sellafield at Hinton House, do you define Hinton House as the community, Warrington as the community? Do you describe West Cumbria as the community? If your engineering team are predominantly based in the Warrington area, supporting Warrington, and you're doing work there, can you please clarify that?
I can do this. So essentially, first of all, a company's social value should be, excuse me, your social value. So you shouldn't really be client-led, but the reality is that clients will be asking for certain things. So as an organisation, think about who your communities are, and then also clients will usually tell you who their communities are. So if you're doing something for Sellafield at Hinton House, then I would go back and look at if is this a social value requirement within the contract, and in which case, where is Sellafield defining that community as being? If they're not defining the community, it's the community that's local to where the activity is going on. If that makes sense. Yeah. Would you agree, Cath?
Yeah, and I'd just like to add something though, back to James, which is when I started data collection, some of our supply chain are not based in West Cumbria. Some of the real technical actually have to tender out. So for instance, I was talking to an organisation, a company based in Oldham. They were doing some amazing social impact work there. Some of it they weren't even recognising as social value and social impact. So when we started the conversation, so what I did was I did collect the data from there, and I have gone back to the Sellafield site client, and I am highlighting some of this activity that's going on, but I have to be aware it's not positively impacting in West Cumbria, but they're still doing a lot of really good stuff in their community and their locality. So I think Claire Louise is quite right. You have to understand what the client wants, but the recognition that if you're not based at all in West Cumbria, then, you know, there is some limitation there.
Thank you. That was helpful. And another question is, how local is local in West Cumbria? What is the community? And I know this is a political question. There's obviously various councils. Could you just elaborate on that a little more? I know it could be controversial.
I don't mind going for that first, Claire Louise. I see West Cumbria. I was born in West Cumbria, and I've spent the last 25 years in West Cumbria. And I call myself West Cumbrian. But what the actual geographical area is obviously Allerdale, the local authority, and Copeland, local authority. And then we've obviously got Cumbria County Council, because we're a two-tier authority. So about West Cumbria being that Allerdale and Copeland. However, when we talk to Sellafield, and I think this would be really useful if any of our previous speakers want to jump in about PPP, what we're looking at is a footprint within West Cumbria. So you're looking at the Whitehaven areas, just south of Whitehaven, then you're looking at the Workington areas. There's possibly more emphasis on Copeland, because that's where the bulk of the workforce for Sellafield is based and coming from. But for me, the West Cumbria is the Allerdale and Copeland. But we have heard senior people from within Copeland saying that, you know, there is the ripple effect, so that when something good happens in a locality, that ripple effect can go right wider out to the rest of Cumbria. But I don't know if Claire Louise wants to jump in, or like I say, Steve or John from the previous speakers.
I would just add to that, Cath, yeah, that at Copeland Allerdale footprint. But when we look at social value, essentially, why are we trying to do it? We are trying to create change for those people who most need support. So a lot of my work is looking at what are called indices of multiple deprivation, which is Office for National Statistics data, and it tells us where particular hotspots of need might occur. And so what we can say as an organisation, we're going to do this activity for these type of people, possibly in this geographical location, or people who are experiencing this kind of issue, to particularly help them. So it's also, yeah, but generally within that geographical location.
Matthew Taylor has responded. He's put specific postcodes in Cumbria and Warrington, the PPP designates as part of their community. So that is obviously quite helpful. I guess community definition is an important part of understanding.
And it goes back to that, what the client's asking for as well, doesn't it? Just be aware of what's being, if this is within contract activity, just look and see and clarify, you know, if there's any confusion.
Can I ask a question, James?
Please.
Yeah, Claire Louise, you said in your slides about social value being relatable and proportionate to the contract. Could you expand on that in terms of if someone's, say, bidding for a 4-year framework, then what does that mean? Do they need to look at the actual total contract value? You know, what do you actually need to consider when you're looking at all of that, please?
Yeah, it's essentially, because this crops up quite a lot, because I sit in these forums quite a lot, and we use apprenticeships, for example, a lot. And actually, for your typical SME and the contract values that we're talking about, it might be that apprenticeships is not a viable option because the contract value isn't big enough. So it's actually what it's saying is that your social value activities should be related to that activity that you're doing. So, and I use the phrase sphere of influence quite a lot. It's understanding what change can you and your organisation doing the things that you do make most difference at. So it's again, I use the example that, you know, I sit in Lancaster, my office is in Lancaster, and I might care passionately about saving the white rhino, but there's not an awful lot that I can do about saving the white rhino apart from support WWF. But I can do quite a lot about young people's aspiration in Morecambe. So it's going through just thinking about it, and the proportionate, yes, as we say, it's what's the value of the project, what's the lifetime of the project, what actually feasibly can we deliver in that lifetime. Does that help, Monica?
Yeah, I think that clears it up, because obviously, you know, I work with companies on bids, and it's something that people sometimes struggle to get their head around is, if it's a 4-year framework, does that mean we need to put forward something that looks good for the full 4 years? I think sometimes people get a little bit stuck around that.
Yeah, Jenny had a question as well. Is there an ongoing process, an audit process for companies' social values plans? I know, Claire Louise, you mentioned as a consultant, but is there a generic process to which they can be audited? My understanding is it's somewhat still in its infancy, that it seems to be very open to interpretation, but please elaborate further.
Yeah, and I saw Cath nodding there that yes, it is in its infancy. So it's actually, we're still going through the process of how will you be monitored on delivery. So you submit an action plan, you say, if we get this work, we will be delivering this. And there's a lot, and Cath had said, you know, when we're talking about data sets and indicators, there's lots and lots out there, and it's a real growth area. And it's the same with auditing, that at the moment, there isn't a recognised audit for social value, but there will be. It will be coming, and organisations like Social Value Portal, who operate the TOMS, which is a very well established social indicator data set. I think it's the kind of thing that they've been getting. And I mean, I actually had a conversation with Social Value Portal about this because I was interested in where they're thinking of going with it. So it will come. Cath, have you got anything to say from the kind of framework perspective of audit?
I think it's like a lot of things with social value. I think it's an evolving picture. I think there are some tools already out there, as Claire Louise has said. There's, for instance, you can, if you want, you can go down the route of measuring social development. So there are people out there who are trained and they can actually come up with a figure at the end of the day that says this is what the social return on investment is. There are other tools that do similar. There's Social Value UK is obviously a lead on this. This is where I did the training for, and I've just done the basic training, so I'm not a practitioner. But there's also Jacob Symmetrica is looking at this. So I think we're going to see more and more of these tools and measurements coming through. I think the challenge for social value as a sector really is to start to look at these as almost like a baseline of what is good, why should we use that, or why should we use that? Is that meant for big companies who do lots and lots of activities, or is that much better at looking at small companies that do a lot less but maybe more intricate or more sort of time dependent? So yeah, I think that there are some measurement tools already out there, some ways of getting some independent verification, but we're certainly not there yet with everything.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think a very thorough answer. Related to that, just a couple of points anyway. So Sue Howarth has she mentioned that investors in community are also working with organisations to help them monitor, audit as well as measurement. I'm unfamiliar who investors in community are. Are they a group? One, I think that's a question. Potentially you can answer that. And another one related from Bav Thacker. Do you have a really good benchmark that you can share with the attendees to help quantify? I know you've shared the Sellafield TOMS. Is that what you'd see as the benchmark? Can you?
It's benchmarking's really difficult because every organisation is different and every contract is different. I mean, is there anything that you can share on that, Cath?
I think when I started looking at it, I went for the TOMS, and TOMS stands for anybody, themes, outcomes, measurements. So it does exactly what it says in the tin, and it's the indicators. And I think, as I said previously, I think we've still got a long way to go before we get there about, sort of like an ISO, 8,000 on social impact or whatever, and really for companies to be able to measure against each other equitably, and we're not there at all yet.
Yeah, there's lots of talk, because I hang out with quite a lot of social. I'm a social impact practitioner from that assessment. Though it's not. I know if people are interested in it, get in touch with me, and I can point in the direction of some really good companies, because I don't specialise in social impact methodologies in that way. But yeah, there's lots of discussions around benchmarking, because there's an ISO 26000 which is corporate responsibility or social responsibility, and there's an ISO 20400 which is sustainable procurement, but both of them are guidance. So even that, they're not. It's an emerging market, shall we say? So it will be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, in terms of just really good indicator set, as Cath said, the TOMS are a good indicator set, and they're open source as well, so you don't have to pay for them, and which is partly why they've kind of cornered the market, because they're freely accessible, and a lot of the local authorities are using them as well. And Sellafield does have a set of Sellafield TOMS. They just don't use them overly, but they are aware of their existence, the TOMS. So, have a look. You can basically, you go to get the TOMS, you go, oh, brilliant, Monica, well done. Monica's just shared the link, and you just register to get the TOMS, and it'll send you, they've rejigged it, and it's actually a lot more accessible than it was. It was just a massive spreadsheet that could be a little bit overwhelming, but it's very clearly defined. So if it's of interest, have a look.
I've just had two questions. Investors in the community. Sue Howard said she's happy to answer that question. And Sue, I'll let you go live. But first of all, I'd just like to go back to Cath and respond to Matt Taylor's question. Is social impact reported as part of the BE project requirements?
It is actually, yes. We it's a bit of a funny one, because BEP predated the Sellafield 6, and there are other social impacts. So we do have social impact. So it's a really odd one, because if you were to say, is it a contractual obligation? I would say no, but there's a high expectation that we do. So I do. So, and linking into the previous conversation, what I did was I rewrote our own BEP strategy earlier this year, and aligned it to the Sellafield 6 strategy. So my strategy literally says, Sellafield, say resilient economies or sustainable incomes, and then I put underneath there what our outcomes are, what we are going to do to meet some of those objectives. So it's I think quite clear to show how the golden thread of what we're trying to achieve and how it links directly back to the Sellafield 6. So although it's not a contractual obligation to that extent, it's an expectation that we will do this, and we are doing it. And what was great was recently I had some really positive feedback from the client team at Sellafield that some of the measurements I was using, which I was using TOMS, and this might be useful for people. I basically went through the TOMS and said, if I want to go back to my own supply chain, I don't want to give them 120 indicators to measure against, because for small businesses, that's just going to be overwhelming. So what I did was I selected some of the TOMs I thought that were more in 6 that I knew that some of the supply chain could do and achieve. And I used those and I put them into a very simple spreadsheet, talked to our supply chain, and then back to the client. And the client was saying, you know, it's not often that they actually get that level of detail and data.
And that's super good practice from a commissioner and procurer perspective, like super good practice. So what we should be seeing in good practice is there being a clarity in what kind of things could be done, because that's the other thing about have a look at the TOMs. Well, are there 120 TOMs, Cath? Because there's like there's a lot, and see, not everything is applicable. So you have to just have that confidence to go through and say, we could do, you know, when I talked about that sphere of influence, we could do that. That's not for us. Oh, we could do that. And so when I'm working with clients, what I do is I often go through the TOMs, particularly for clients that are working with local authorities that are working with the TOMs. And I just work with them to help them understand which of the TOMs are appropriate for them and how they actually implement them into. So, okay, if you're going to do skills-based volunteering, what actual implication has that got for your HR functions and your operations? And can you actually give people time off to volunteer? Because if you can't, then that's not the one for you, but there's other things. So we kind of have that conversation. Yeah, but it's really, really helpful when the actual contracts go and we you know, we'd like you to work with these or we suggest these.
That's really good discussion. Hopefully this has prompted some of that dialogue in procurement may think about that. So can we just get back to investors in community then? Would you like to elaborate further if you're happy to come on the line?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm sorry, I'll just do that. Can you hear me okay? So, yeah, I'm here with 2 hats actually, my family business network and investors in community. Investors in community, my co-director Dave Clarkson is sort of, he's part of it. It's actually a blockchain platform which is written in green code through IBM. But the founder is Phil Webb, and it's bringing together the charities, the businesses and the individuals. And it's all about measuring that as a measuring tool. So similar to some of the others that you've mentioned today, but for the 5 ways of giving. So you were talking, Cath and Claire, in quite a lot of detail around the skilled volunteering within the communities, and that it's a tool that helps to capture that. It can be used in any tender. The government have endorsed it. They obviously can't officially sort of say this is the tool that you have to use, but the government were involved in their launch, and it's something that's being used across within the communities. And the family business sector comes to it is because over 80% of businesses across the UK of any size are family owned, hence our involvement within the supply chain. I did put the website in the chat because it also does the measurement and the audit, and it will connect. And it does both for both the charities and the businesses. So it's a really good audit tool for what you were talking about before in terms of that supply chain. So I don't want to take up the airtime, sorry. So I can send more details, but yeah.
I mean, this is all, the chat is just as a valuable part of this discussion. Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think, sorry, I'm just, Lauren had a question. Lauren, sorry, my slider bar's moving. Yeah, do we think we'll see more focus on carbon reduction in social impact? In recent years, Sellafield, the social impact have focused more on employment, local economic benefits. Do you think it'll relate a little more to the wider environment?
Can I just say that it's within the social value model, climate change. It's been mentioned in this latest procurement note. So yes, I think that the devil's in the detail, because when we look at social value and how environmental sustainability fit together, and I tend to say to clients that I think that, you know, within social value and within indicators, there's all the standard carbon reduction, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but a lot of social value is about how we create behavioural change. So I think a lot of environmental sustainability stuff is the tangibles, the hard, cold, we are reducing X a volume of climate, of carbon, but social value is about people. A lot of it is about, it's about people. So it's how do we encourage people to change their behaviours, both internally within our organisations and also externally within our stakeholders, including our supply chain. So that for me is where the link is together.
Cath, did you just have a comment on that?
I think I put it in the chat that building on, I agree with what Claire Louise has said, but it's actually also in Sellafield's own 6 strategy now. So yes, there will be more emphasis, but I think it has to be considered about what that means. And I think Claire Louise has outlined some of that really well.
Okay.
Sorry, Jay, I've just got to give it a really nice example of where when I'd been talking to the organisation and I'd said, look, could you send me some information for our impact newsletter? I do a monthly impact newsletter and I showcase our supply chain. And it's a really good way of them being able to tell the rest of the BEP staff, and everybody involved in BEP, the client, what they're actually delivering. And they'd sent me some information and pictures. It was lovely. And then just as a little note at the bottom, they'd put on that they have now changed all their vans over to electric, and they're investing in electric diggers as well. So I just thought it was just something very little, but obviously environmental impact, and it was just a tiny little byline. So I immediately sort of pulled that out. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Cath. That's really appreciated. And Claire, that's prompted some really great discussion and a really great presentation. So we'll pull that aspect to a close now. I'd really like if we can all clap our hands, or is it electronically now, to show our appreciation to all the speakers today, Claire, Cath, and earlier Steve, John. So yeah, thank you very much. So as the Northern Nuclear Alliance, we really have put a season or a programme of events together, really just for our members to hopefully talk about the areas that are of interest to them as a business. So if you'd like to get back in touch, email myself or email Lauren, or get in touch at Info Nuclear Alliance UK to talk about opportunities that you'd like to hear about more. So get in touch. We're going to sit down and discuss our future speaker program. So tell us what interests you and we'll hopefully find out more. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Does anybody else? I'll open it up. Lauren, do you want to conclude it as our chair, really? But I'm just bringing it to a close now.
Sorry, I'll be very quiet today because I've got building going on, so I didn't want to have all the banging in the background going around me. Yeah, no, thanks very much, guys. A great session today. Another one really is just for input from the membership is we had our steering group meeting the week before last, and we're now going back through our process of looking at the 3-year plan and what we're really about and kind of the projects that we've launched. So we have a number of subcommittees. So the events subcommittee is led by James, but we also have the social impact one. We have the clean growth, and we're looking at SME development as another one as well. So really, I just want to get much input and support from all our membership on getting involved, but also making sure that we are covering the topics and the projects that you think are important. So any feedback is welcomed. If anyone would like to have a chat with me around at any point, drop me a note, and yeah, it'd be great to just get your input for it.
Oh, I wanted to ask Cath, Claire Louise, do you want to run the poll quickly? Asking your follow-up questions. Sorry, I nearly forgot about that. 1 second. Here we go.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just we threw this in the last minute because we were saying what level of understanding people have, and whether, has my whistle-stop tour of what social value is just confounded everybody, or is everybody like, yes, we're so on that, because if you'd like some more, we can spend some more time talking about indicators, talking about priorities and stuff like that. So
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to, oh, have we got the results coming in?
Just letting the last few votes come in, and then I will share them. So I'm going to end the poll now. Can you see the results?
Right, so that's quite interesting then. So we'll have a think about it on the social value group for the NNA, and think about what we might do that helps. But if anybody's got any suggestions, you've got my details and you've got Monica's details and Cath's. I mean, just drop us an email and say specifically, I think I'd like a bit more support in this area. If there was anything that kind of jumped out at you, you know, do tell us, because then we'll try and pull something together. Okay.
Okay, yeah, we're all very open to try and we're here for our members to try and benefit, and if we all can collaborate and generate business opportunities for us all as well, that's great. So I guess we'll just pull the event to a close. Thanks for everyone who's tuning in, and we'll be in touch again to tell you our new autumn and winter season program events. So thanks very much. We'll, if you'd like to log out now, that's appreciated. See you later.